Okay. So I do get a lot of video requests from people from videos from creators like Dark Somnium, Creepypasta, uh, all of that. I get requests all the time, and I love it, and I love it, and I love y'all. So I know I seem a bit weird, but I had a nightmare that, like, I swear changed my whole perception on reality, bro. I don't even know what to think. Though I think a tale that may closely come to replicating that nightmare I just recently had would be Mr. Gangly Walks the Halls. But as with other creators, usually the creators will message me and say it's completely fine. Some even subscribe and like to tag along for the journey, and I absolutely love that. So just know, if I don't upload too many videos or requests from the creepypasta genre and the storytelling genre, well, you know why. But I have been being told that people want me to read or do fiction, non-fiction reads, or story times, stuff like that. So if you ever want me to read these stories or narrate them myself, or just do like a kind of like, it almost feels like I'm live streaming, but have it up on the screen and read along, that'll be cool too. I will do stuff like that. But I don't know the whole thing with these creators, because in the past I think I've watched videos by these creators. I've never heard anything from them, and maybe they're just unaware, don't care, whatever it may be. I just want to make sure it's always okay with the creator that I'm watching, that it's cool that I'm watching their content. So like I said, if you don't see me cover too many of these videos, it's because I never known. Like with these videos, I just don't know. But we'll see. Maybe the more videos I react to, they'll get attention from the creators and they'll come by and say something. So hopefully that's what happens. And until then, send all your support out to, this one is the Dark Somnium. And yeah, the Dark Dream. I love that. Anyways, here we go. Mr. Gangly Walks the Halls. Shout out to Brandon. I said there'd be a little message for you in the beginning, so that little intro is for you. Don't worry, I'm not ignoring your requests. I don't know with the Storytime channels how listening. I guess it's kind of the same as listening to SCP ones, but you know, like I said, I've heard things from them, so it's not. Yeah, I don't know how Dark Somnium feels. Alright, enough time wasted. This is a long form video. 22 minutes. Get your snacks, get a drink, sit back, get ready. Let's do this, man. That nightmare rocked me, man. Usually they don't. I usually don't care, but there was something about that felt prophetic in a way, bro. I don't know, man. I'm gonna keep my eye on some signs that pop up. Let's go.
Dearest Margaret, I hope that this letter finds you well. I've missed you greatly during the entire time away from you, but these past few weeks have been especially difficult. While we were busy pushing from Normandy, it was easier to keep my mind occupied on other things.
Normandy.
Now that the Germans have left France, however...
So we got a World War creepypasta. I think I'm gonna do this to see how fast it is.
I've had a lot more time to myself, and, as always, my thoughts have turned to you. Yeah. I have good news.
I'm gonna do 1.25 if that doesn't bother anybody.
Or bad news, depending on how you look at things. As you're an optimist by nature, a very glass-half-full kind of woman, I'll give you the positive spin first. You and I are going to be reunited sooner than we thought. I'll be shipping off to the good old US of A within the next few weeks. No matter how optimistic you are, however, you are also a realist. So here's the bad news. The reason that I'll be coming home to you so early is because I've been injured. Now, there's no need to worry, as I'm going to be fine. Once the bullets stopped flying in France, my unit had been assigned to deliver cargo to Avioliba.
No, I feel wrong.
You've always been more of a scholar than I am, so you may be familiar with the town. I'd never heard of it before. There were only 3 large crates, so Mark Johnston and I volunteered to make the delivery. I've written to you about him before. He's the soldier in my platoon that has a wife and young son in Kansas. All of my fellow soldiers are brothers, but he's one of the few that I can honestly say is a friend. The round trip between Paris and Avioliba would take a few days, and we'd figured that the fresh mountain air would do us some good. We never spoke about it, but I think we were both feeling that we needed to get out of Paris, even if only for a little while. When you see pictures of Paris in books, it looks like a grand place. You can practically feel the magic in the air right through the page. It conjures up images of long walks along the Seine River, or maybe ascending to the top of the Eiffel Tower to look out on the lights of the city.
Okay, Tim. I like how you wrote that part. As for Somnium over here, doing a great job narrating. I love it. How do we even talk about something like this? I think the impactful moments are gonna come when Mr. Gangly joins the equation, because for now it's just gonna be me listening. That's why I said I don't really know about these story times sometimes. But I suppose in the SCP ones they're the same. But those ones kind of kick off fast. So hopefully it'll be enjoyable just sitting with me and listening to it. I hope you guys enjoy that, because I feel weird. It feels like I'm just like uploading their video. But nonetheless, we push forth. Let's go.
You and I even talked about visiting it someday after we're married. I think that's how the city once was, and maybe it will be like that again. In the here and now, though, the magic is gone.
Yeah.
The Nazis did all they could to stomp out the spirits of the people that lived there. They never fully could, but you can tell that the occupation left its mark in more ways than just those damn red and black banners hanging from buildings. The enchantment and wonder of the city is gone for now, replaced with an iron resolve and a righteous fury. The longer I stayed there, the more that I could feel the violation Paris had suffered through, if that makes any sense. Is it any wonder Johnston and I jumped at the opportunity to run a shipment through the countryside? It was supposed to be a simple delivery. As everyone in the world knows, though, there's nothing simple about this war. I don't remember the moment that the truck's rear tire struck the mine. It must have been left over from the Germans' retreat, or maybe had been planted by the French resistance when the Nazis were using that particular road. Whatever the case, the explosion flipped the truck completely over and sent us off the road.
Ooh.
I only know this because it was told to me later.
Oh,
I remember sitting in the past.
Damn, so he was knocked out from this. That's tough. I can imagine. That'd be horrible. Because I've been in vehicles that lost control, and I can't imagine hitting a fucking explosive device and then that shit just sending y'all and then like being knocked unconscious. I've gone into like food comas, but I don't know what being knocked unconscious is truly like. Like, you've had those moments where you've slipped into falling asleep where you can't control it, like trying to keep your eyes up, but then you're just and you're gone, and then when someone tells you, yo, you knocked out, you're kind of like, what? I don't even remember. I feel like that's what being knocked unconscious feels like, but
passenger seat while Johnston drove, idly flipping through a Captain Marvel comic book that I had traded a small bottle of half-drunk whiskey to a private for. I'm not much for comic books, but there was something about it that made me feel like, I don't know, made me feel like I was holding a piece of home in my hands, I suppose. After that, my next memory is slowly waking up. I was lying on something soft, and my body felt oddly cold. Instinctively,
no.
I tried to sit up, but the worst pain I've ever felt went through my body like electricity. It felt like someone was forcefully pushing down on me while trying to set me ablaze. I shook my head in an effort to clear it. I hadn't even opened my eyes yet, and I was already feeling dizzy. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a woman's voice politely but firmly told me to calm down. As I managed to get my eyes open and squinted against the bright light, she went on to explain that I had been in a mine explosion and to assure me that I was going to be okay. My vision returned to normal after a few minutes, and I was able to look up at the speaker. She was dressed in the white uniform of a nurse, with red curls peeking out from under her hat and freckles.
I don't know, y'all, that like feel this powerfully, like literally feel this powerfully through storytelling, but literally as he's describing this, I feel like my spine is snapped. Oh man, it's insane.
Dotting her nose. She smiled down at me kindly and told me that her name was Ruth. I tried sitting up, but it had the same result as before. Ruth informed me that I had suffered a fractured sternum when my chest had impacted the front portion of the transport truck. It sounded serious, but she told me that I just needed to rest and it would heal naturally.
Oh,
Normally,
oh,
ice would have been put on my
sounded
chest to help
serious.
with the swelling and lessen the pain. There wasn't any access to ice, however, so she was using rags soaked in cool water instead. Along with the
What?
fractured sternum, I had suffered a painful bump on the head and a sprained ankle. I had
Oh,
managed to escape in surprisingly good condition, all things considered. Johnston hadn't been so lucky. He was lying in the bed next to me,
oh
unconscious,
no.
and his body wrapped in bandages. Every so often, I could hear a gasp as he sucked in air. The gasps sounded wet, like they were filled with water. The nurse told me that they hoped he would recover soon, but I could tell by the tone of her voice that
Oh
she
yeah.
wasn't hopeful. Over the next few
Oof.
hours, Ruth...
He could tell by the tone of her voice that she wasn't hopeful. Oh, I suppose that can mean like he's probably better passing than surviving that.
sat and talked with me. Well, she did most of the talking. Even getting a few words out made my chest hurt, so I mostly just sat there and listened. She told me that we were in an old chateau, known to the locals as Chateau des Esprits. It had been the home of a wealthy but eccentric landowner who had died at the beginning of the war. He hadn't had any children or family, so the mansion was converted into a temporary
hospital. It's so funny that I decided to go with Mr. Gangley Walks the Halls, and let me tell you why. That nightmare that I said shook me last night took place in a hospital. So go fucking figure that I would be listening to this, man. That is just how things align for me in this universe. Go figure. I said this seems like, I literally said it in the beginning. I picked this one because it literally seemed like it is going to relate to the dream that I had. I'll tell the story. As it goes on, I think I'll tell the story when we actually meet Mr. Gangley, because Mr. Gangley sounds like some freaking cursed abomination that we're about to see. And I'm actually, because of that and then the dream just clouding my mind right now, I forgot who he said owned the place. Did he say it was a Mr. Gangley? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. It was somebody else that was the owner of this building. So we're gonna see. I should have been paying attention there, but as that happened, I was like, of fucking course, man, because I was in a hospital in my dream, so it just clouded me, but I get it so far. So our main character was in a not necessarily a mining incident, right? But it was coming out of the place or transporting something. We have the nurse, we have his partner that was there. I'll just say partner aboard, and he's not doing so good, gasping for air, but his injuries aren't so serious. They'll naturally heal. It's funny that this rich farm owner didn't have any leftover ice. What am I saying? Let's go. But man, as soon as
Most of the doctors and nurses were French, but Ruth was a volunteer with the Red Cross that had been
lucky.
sent to assist due to the place being woefully understaffed.
Oh,
She eventually left my side to tend to other patients. As I stared up at the ceiling,
there's other
a stray
patients.
thought entered my head, and despite my condition, I found myself smiling. It was a crooked sort of smile. Can you imagine, Marguerite? Here I was, relaxing in a fancy chateau in the French Alps, and I couldn't even get out of bed to enjoy a moment of it. I had to admit that I tried not...
I would not be saying that. That mindset is cool for me. I understand those perspectives, but just the way I've always been built, I never think like that. I would literally be like, yo, I'm glad I have my life. Fuck them Alps, bro. I can see them after I'm healed, bro. Especially I don't have a necessarily like fear. Like that's what's weird about the hospital nightmare I have. I don't have a fear of hospitals, but that's so weird that I had one that was nightmarish. And I think as we get to this Mr. Gangley, I think it may line up close to what I seen or just experienced, because it was insanely vivid, bro. But yeah,
not to look at Johnston. Every time I
guess his crooked smile was a laugh, kind of like a laugh. Like, how go figure I'm in here. I'd be like, hey, bro, I would finish that writing with, at least I got my life. I can enjoy the
direction, I felt an awful stab of guilt. I had survived the explosion and would be back on my feet soon.
the
Meanwhile,
guilt, yeah.
he was fighting for his life. It wasn't fair. Even though I kept my eyes off of him, I could still hear him wheezing and drawing in those wet breaths.
Can you imagine?
Evening
Is he
came,
listening?
and Ruth returned to help me eat my dinner. It wasn't much of a meal, just broth and small bits of potato, but I was so hungry that it felt like a banquet. When I had finished, she changed out the rags with freshly soaked ones and put the used ones in a small bucket. Have you ever experienced the kind of moment where it feels like the very air in the room has changed, Margaret? That was what I experienced once Ruth finished her tasks. Her entire demeanor went from warm and friendly to something much more serious. The smile was gone from her face, and her eyes were uncertain. What wasn't uncertain was her firm instructions that, even if I found myself able to get up, I must not leave the room during the night. I pressed her as to why, of course, but she simply shook her head and turned to leave. Ignoring the pain, I grabbed her wrist and asked once more. She hesitated before gently removing her hand from my weak grip.
Monsieur gang里面是dans les couloirs.
She said quietly in French before leaving the room and firmly closing the two large doors behind her. Mr. Gangley walks the halls. I stared after her for quite a while. To say that I was confused would be an understatement. I was fairly sure that I understood her correctly, but as you're well aware, I've never had much of a head for languages. It wasn't hard to convince myself that my poor French simply wasn't up to the task of properly translating her statement. With that settled in my mind, I quickly drifted off to sleep. You and I have known each other since we were small children. We started school together. You know me better than anyone else, and I'm still afraid of what you're going to think of me when I tell you what came next. You're going to think that I've lost my mind. I don't see how anyone could think otherwise. I swear to you, Margaret, I'm not mad, and what I'm about to tell you is the honest-to-God truth. I need you to believe me.
We're about to get into 10 minutes of terror. Let's do this. Let's do this. It sounds like he's alive. If he's writing this, that means he survived this whole encounter, and I'm glad. But first, before we get into this horrible encounter. Okay, she told him, do not walk the halls at night. He can't. He can't. He said for what? I don't know if I heard that wrong. I gotta be more present. I don't know why I'm missing small details like that. I guess it's because my anticipation or something for just getting to the scary part. I'm missing certain details. But she told him to not walk the halls at anything, or yeah, I don't know, cuz he was puzzled, right? Cuz he can't move. Mr. Gangley's going to come and treat him. Yeah, my dream was absolutely insane. I think I want to save it at the end. So if you really want to watch till the end, I'll let you come catch the dream afterwards. I'm also going to tell it on my second channel, but cuz I don't want to forget that shit for a little bit. That shit was different.
No one else ever will, but you're the one person that has to. Please. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The room was dark and still. I knew immediately that something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same feeling in my stomach that I had gotten during lulls in battles throughout the war.
Them gut
Sometimes
feelings.
the guns would go silent, and an eerie silence would fall over everything. Instead of being happy for the reprieve, you start to feel sick to your stomach because you know that something even worse than what you just went through was about to happen. That was the same feeling I was having as I laid in the darkness. Something was about to happen. I was so sure of it that I ignored the pain and forced myself up onto my elbows in an attempt to look around. I couldn't stay in the position for more than a few seconds.
Anytime something scary happens, just stay like this. Let that monster come in and do whatever it wants to. Just be like this. I'm just joking. That. But we all know about the playing dead under the covers. You wake up, reverse that wake up. You was never awake.
Before I collapsed back down onto the bed, less than a heartbeat after I had done so, I heard a soft click as the room's doors began to swing open. I craned my neck as best as I could and turned my eyes
bro.
toward the sound. There was just enough light coming in through the windows for me to see the figure enter the room, but not enough that I was able to make out any details. It was over 8 feet tall, and it had to duck under the top of the doorway to enter the room. It was wearing a black flowing robe that covered most of its features. As it came forward, it stayed hunched over. It moved with an odd gait, swaying slightly back and forth as it walked. Even though it was the largest creature I had ever seen, it made barely any noise as it moved across the wood floor towards the beds, like it had very little weight to it. I knew immediately that this giant wasn't human. I know how that sounds, Margaret, and this is why I'm afraid that you're going to think I've been driven mad by the war. If you do indeed love me as you say that you do, though, I need you to take what I'm saying at face value and put aside your skepticism until you finish my story. Because of the creature's size, it only took a few steps for it to reach the foot of Johnston's bed. It was starting to lean over him when I closed my eyes as tightly as I could. As I write this, I can feel the shame rising in me. This thing was going to do God knows what to a man that was closer to me than my own family, and there I was, keeping my eyes clenched shut like a frightened child trying to hide from a shadow on his bedroom wall. What kind of a friend, what kind of a man does that make me? I laid as still as I could for what seemed like hours, but all that I heard was silence. Curiosity started to win out over the fear. I slowly opened my eyes. The creature was still looming over Johnston, but it was completely motionless. Its arms were extended towards his face. The robe's sleeves were pulled back enough that I could see the limbs. In the dim moonlight, they looked almost white. So white that it was like a single drop of blood had never run through their veins. They were also extremely thin. No, that's not the right word for it. They looked emaciated. Its hands were attached to the arms at a slightly odd angle. I had seen something similar before, when a private had dislocated his hand from his wrist in a bad fall. Its fingers were long and bony, and they reached out towards Johnston's face. The hood of the robe was up over its head, and at the angle I was seeing the creature from, its face was completely blocked off from view. It was hard to tell in the dark, but I got the impression that the head was too large for the body. The width wasn't proportionate with the arms and legs. Everything about the creature was wrong, and I felt a sense of revulsion as I watched it.
What the fuck?
Johnston coughed once. The creature pulled back slightly, but when he didn't make another sound, it drew closer once again. It reached out with one finger and touched him slightly on the forehead.
Keep coughing.
He made a soft choking noise, but remained unconscious. The finger moved down his face, tracing down the nose, across the lips, and over the chin. It stopped when its tip was touching Johnston's neck. The man's entire body had stiffened as if the creature was sending a live current through him. I wanted to yell out to him, to warn him about what was happening. My mouth remained closed. I was already trying to justify my lack of action to myself. There was no point in letting the creature know that I was watching when Johnston was too injured to hear me anyway.
Mind your business.
That was what I told myself over and over again. The truth is that I was paralyzed by fear. In the moment that my friend needed me most, I proved myself to be a coward. The creature's hand opened, and it wrapped its fingers around Johnston's neck. He whimpered quietly. The whimpering soon turned into gagging as the fingers closed tightly. I tried to will myself to somehow intervene. Fear and a fractured sternum be damned. Instead, I just laid there watching. The figure held up one finger on its other hand and placed its point between Johnston's clavicles. It lingered there for a moment before pushing down harder. The finger sank into and through the skin. He started to thrash, but the creature simply held him by the throat as if it was no effort at all.
What the fuck is this story, bro? Yep. This is some writing here. This is some writing here. Wow. Yeah. Jesus. I hate tall, emaciated thin white creatures, bro. Almost make me sound like a monster racist. Heck no, man. I don't deal in things like this.
The finger slowly started to make its way down to his chest. Skin and muscle and bone all parted as if it was being cut with the sharpest of surgeon instruments. When it reached the top of his stomach area, it withdrew. Blood covered it, and droplets dripped down onto the man's body. What came next has played over and over in my head ever since. The creature reached into the hole in Johnston's chest and pulled the opening wider. The snapping of bone filled the air as his ribs were easily separated. The arm jerked slightly to one side, and a moment later, the hand rose out of the open chest cavity, holding a misshapen lump. Johnston stopped thrashing. I must have made a sound because the creature turned its head toward me. The hood still covered its face, but I knew it was watching me closely. Instead of closing my eyes, however, I looked right back at it. It wasn't some act of bravery or defiance. I was just
you were
too scared
you
to
were
think
a
of
deer
anything
in the
else to do.
headlights. Yeah,
It
bro.
moved to the side of my bed. The gory mass it had
A deer in the headlights, bro. You should have just not moved, bro.
taken from Johnston's chest was still clutched in its right hand. I couldn't see exactly what the object was. I was, and still am, thankful for that. The creature regarded me for a long moment before reaching up with its free hand and slowly pulling back the hood. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sounds came out. I was stricken voiceless by fear. It was all that I could do to simply keep breathing. Instead of being rounded, its head was elongated, with malformed protrusions sticking out of the back. It was hairless, and like its arms, the flesh was pale to the point of being nearly translucent.
What the fuck?
It looked at me with lidless eyes, the pupils locked on me so intently that they appeared to be vibrating. The creature's face was vaguely human. The best way that I can describe it is that it looked like a person whose skin had been pulled back so tightly that it began to tear off the skull.
Oh.
The large teeth and gums were exposed in a hideous grin, one so large that it ran past the mouth towards the back of the elongated head to show the bone beyond. It tilted its head slightly.
Gross.
I wasn't looking at just some hideous monster. Its eyes stared at me with intelligence. It opened its mouth slightly as it regarded me. Just beyond the first row of human-like but oversized teeth was a second row of them. These were smaller and spaced wider apart. Its thick black tongue sloshed around, back and forth in its thick saliva.
Gute Nacht, Herr Lewis.
The creature said in a raspy
Guten
voice,
dog.
the words coming out as if it was exhaling them rather than speaking them. With that, the creature
Exhaling
turned
them?
and left the room the same way it had come in, closing the door behind it.
What
I must have passed
what
out.
did that mean?
The next thing I knew, I was regaining consciousness in a room filled with sunlight. I quickly looked over to my right at Johnston's bed. The spot that the bed had once occupied was empty. Ruth came in a few minutes later. I demanded to know what had happened to Johnston, and she told me that he died from his wounds a few hours earlier. I knew she was lying, of course. I had seen the creature tear him open and end his life. I continued to press her, and as I did so, she grew more and more uncomfortable. She repeatedly tried to tell me that I must have dreamed the entire thing. I became more and more agitated, and finally she relented. She leaned in, as if she was telling me something that needed to stay between the two of us, even though we were the only ones in the otherwise empty room. Every so often, she would glance over her shoulder at the doors as she spoke. She told me that Johnston's body had been taken down to the makeshift morgue to be disposed of. When I started to object, she shook her head firmly and told me to remain quiet. The official record would say that the body was incinerated due to the concerns of a possible disease. That way, no one would know about the damage the creature had caused to his body. No one but me. She warned me not to let anyone else know that I had seen the creature, which she again referred to as Mr. Gangley. The few outside of the hospital staff that had tried to tell the others what they had seen had all died under mysterious circumstances. I needed to remain silent for my own safety. At first, I refused, but something in the way she was looking at me made me stop. I got the feeling that she wasn't just looking out for my safety, but also her own.
Yeah.
I began to
clearly.
understand that her current position at the chateau wasn't entirely voluntary.
It wasn't.
Still trying to wrap my mind around everything that I had seen and that she was telling me, I questioned her about Mr. Gangley. What was it? How long had it been at the chateau? Why had it killed Johnston? The questions spilled out of me as if they would never end. Ruth didn't have any solid answers to give me. All the doctors and nurses at the hospital seemed to have a different story. Some said that Mr. Gangley was an experiment that had been conducted by German scientists during the occupation. Others said it was actually a German scientist itself, one that had done things to himself for some unknown reason and was still conducting experiments on the patients in his new grotesque form. She had been told by one doctor that he believed it was a demon that had been summoned by Nazi occultists. I mulled it over. Mr. Gangley had spoken to me in German. Hesitantly, not sure that I really wanted to know the answer, I asked how it had known my name. Ruth looked surprised and regarded me curiously. As she opened her mouth to speak, the doors opened and a pair of soldiers entered the room. They told me that I was being transferred to a hospital in Paris immediately, and that's where I'm writing you from now, Margaret. I'm still sitting at a small table in a private room of one of the dozens of medical facilities in Paris. It's been dark for some time, but I can still hear the sounds of talking and laughing coming up from the streets through my open window. Medically, I'm doing much better. My fractured sternum is almost fully healed, and I only have slight discomfort from it when I move around. Mentally, I'm not really sure how I'm doing. I have trouble sleeping at night, and during the day I feel like I'm walking through a dream. Sometimes I think about how I failed Johnston and feel a mixture of remorse and anger, and other times I realize that I haven't thought of him in a while, and for some reason, that makes me even more angry. There are times that I debate with myself whether I should write Johnston's wife and tell her what really happened to her husband. Each time I decide not to, even if I could figure out how to begin to describe Mr. Gangley and what it had done to him. How could her knowing the truth be any comfort to her? I'm scheduled to ship out for the United States 2 weeks from Tuesday. As I come to the end of this letter, however, I realize that I can't come back home to you yet. Even if you somehow found a way to forgive my cowardice, I would never be able to. God help me. I have to go back to Chateau des Esprits, where Mr. Gangley walks the halls. I love you, Margaret, and I'm sorry. Always yours, Corporal Peter Lewis, United States Army, October 14th, 1944.
Wow. What a story, bro. That makes me think his reasoning for going back. If the nurse told him that she was there voluntarily, maybe same thing happened where she's staying to figure out what's going on. I don't really know his reason for going back. If they transferred him, maybe he's trying to solve more what's going on. I wouldn't want to meet that thing in the hallway. No siree. But yeah, mine wasn't that crazy. I think I'll leave it for the second channel if you guys are curious. Yeah, I'll leave it. It's already been a long video. That was insane. I would not go back, bro. Unless he feels like he has some sort of like he owes his friend? Not a chance. I'm doing that. Not a chance, bro. I would do research. I would do my research in Paris about local myths or local legends or local people going missing at this place at the chateau, but not a chance am I gonna step foot back in that place. Also, I kind of felt like the story was gonna lead. I'm kind of glad the way it went with when he was transferred. I thought for sure when he was transferred he was gonna see it in his sleep in the new place. Maybe. And also, what did it say to him in German? Does anyone know? Because it said let me see. It said It sounded like it said Guten Tag, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, it said Guten Tag. It did. It said good day. That's what I thought. It said Guten Tag, and I was like, I know what Guten Tag means, but is that what it said? And it said good day. Okay, that was. So maybe it takes patients close to death, but not ones that are recovering. Cause he was okay. But man, I gotta know why they can't talk about it either, Mr. Gangly. Well, all right. What if they call him Mr. Gangly because he's like a German scientist? So they put the instead of Dangly because he's super tall and like thin. It's instead of Mr. Dangly, it's Mr. Gangly. I thought it was gonna be a crazier story about this thing walking the halls, but I thought it was gonna be more like he can't get up and go to the halls. So is he gonna hear stuff from the halls? So that's a weird title. I didn't expect it to come in the room. That's a good title for the twist that ended up happening. But alright, much love Moonlight. I'm out of here. That shit was terrifying.